many of us are still recovering from Donald Trump's advice about the therapeutic benefits of disinfectant. It reminded me of being at a wedding where an eccentric uncle has got up to make a speech, and it's an embarrassing speech, but the uncle can't see that it's embarrassing and doesn't know when to stop. Only this is a more sinister version of that. Now, I don't want to talk about today the often abusive and violent actions and language of Trump. In a sense, I want to look at his motivation to see what makes him tick. And in many ways, the recurring theme that comes out in his presidency is that the driving force, the motivation for Donald Trump is Donald Trump. He is focused and he is prepared to use any strategies to say anything in order to further the cause of Donald Trump. From a spiritual perspective, you could say that Trump is a man who has everything but nothing. It's as though there's no home on the inside. In contrast, I want us to go back to those graphic images of the Christchurch massacre in New Zealand, particularly the role their Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern played. What a contrast. She was present for those people who were really hurting. It was natural. She was deeply distressed and upset for their suffering. She responded to the victims of this crisis with compassion, with sensitivity, and with strength. It came from the heart. Today, I'm exploring the theme of what it means to live by the heart. Now, as soon as I mention the word heart, I know some will think of something very sentimental or romantic. But I have a different view of the heart. The heart is our true self. It's a metaphor for our core being. When we speak or act from the heart, we've found our centre of gravity. It gives us a strength. So rather than sentiment, or in particular romantic sentiments, it's often about getting in touch with who we are and our core values and acting out of those values. When I compare Donald and Jacinda, I see a dramatic contrast between someone who's trying to use every skill and capacity he can to bring about certain strategic goals or expediencies. On the other hand, there's someone speaking from the heart. Jacinda, who regularly acts that way because that's her, is politically savvy. She's intelligent. The two things aren't exclusive, speaking from the heart and acting with erudition and astuteness. They go together. So we're exploring today what it means to live by the heart, and I guess in many ways it's about leadership, but it's also about the kind of communities that kind of leadership creates. In the Gospel of John, there is a real tussle about the question of leadership. In particular, there's a section in John chapter 10 where Jesus presents himself as the Good Shepherd. Now, sometimes the interpretation of this story is also confused with sentiment, but it's actually about leadership. It's about leadership in an early church, a church that is divided, that is fractious. And here is the leadership that Jesus offers and the kind of community that will stem from it. Now, to appreciate the significance of what this text is saying, we need to go back to the Hebrew scriptures and the prophet Ezekiel. Jesus in John chapter 10 presents himself in the Good Shepherd. And there's no doubt the background for this text is Ezekiel chapter 34. Ezekiel is an ancient prophet. In the 6th century before the Common Era, he is amongst the refugees, the Jewish refugees in exile, round about where we might think of modern Iraq. In that context, Ezekiel comes forth with this scathing criticism of the leaders of Israel and Judah. And he refers to them as the false shepherds. And this is the contrast. This is the the critical contrast that lies at the background of when Jesus refers to himself as the Good Shepherd. If we return briefly back to Ezekiel, his main criticism of these false shepherds is that instead of caring for the people, they have been preoccupied with themselves. Instead of acting with compassion and empathy, they are concerned about their own ends and purposes. He chastises them for neglecting the weak, the poor, the marginalised, and because of these actions of either exploitation or of injustice, they have failed. They have completely failed to be good leaders. So returning back to the Gospel of John, here is Jesus in this community towards the end, well, the story of Jesus in this community towards the end of the first century. It's a divided community. They're trying to clarify what they believe in, what is important, what kind of Jesus they wish to follow, how they will remember and honour his leadership. And Jesus presents himself as a good shepherd, someone who is radically committed to the care of the people, to the point where he is willing to risk his own life in the name of love. Above all, he wants the people to benefit. He often talks about in the Gospel of John the people receiving living water or living bread or life abundantly. He wants the community of this community to flourish, to live with justice, with compassion and with heart, for it to be a heart-inspired community that acts with love, acts with compassion and carries out works of justice. It is a remarkable contrast, and it presents to us I think, a stark example of not only contemporary leadership, but also what contemporary, in this instance, Christian communities ought to look like. Now, we live in a very difficult era in the age of the virus, where people are really hurting. They're struggling. Some people are right in the firing line and they're literally dying or they're very ill. Others are desperately trying to care for those people. But many of us are feeling stressed and uncertain about the future. On the other hand, it's also a period where we've seen some really extraordinary acts of generosity and compassion. And what I want to suggest today is that in these periods of great chaos and stress, often new and important things emerge. And in many ways, what we're going through can be described as a paradigm shift. Paradigm shift is a term that goes back to a philosopher of science, Thomas Kuhn, who wrote this most remarkable book in 1962, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. The gist of his argument is that science doesn't develop in a straight line. What often happens is a problem presents itself, like trying to find a vaccine for a virus. And immediately there's confusion within various scientific communities who aren't sure what's the right procedure, what are the rules that they should follow in this period of paradigm shift. It's a period of uncertainty, of confusion, of some angst. But it's also a period of experimentation where people try new things. In Kuhn's interpretation of science, this is often the period where new things or novelties emerge which lead to new discoveries. So on a broader scale, on a global scale, as we deal with the problem of the virus, we're also going through a paradigm shift. The rules, the conventions, the things in the past that brought us great comfort don't seem to be working. And it is a period of deep anxiety, of angst, the kind of dread that comes from the pit of the stomach. But it's also a period of possibility, where people are open to new ideas. I haven't brought myself up to replaying Donald Trump's advice about the therapeutic benefits of disinfectant. I think too the next day when he tried to dismiss it as just being sarcastic, only added insult to injury. But I remember very clearly, and I've gone back to several times, the images of Jacinda Ardern and her response to those people in crisis. She's someone who lives by the heart. I'm not talking about some kind of empty piety or sentiment. To live by the heart is to engage deeply and passionately from the things that really matter. It is grounded in our values. When we live by the heart, we act in an ethical way with strength and conviction. This is the core, this is the root of real leadership. I suspect in the coming months there's going to be an increased hunger for a new kind of leadership in the political realm. I'm not expecting any radical changes, but I do think we are hearing new voices and new possibilities. And these possibilities give each and every one of us a sense of heart. They encourage us to live by the heart, to seek out the things that really matter. In the early Christian community, as it was trying to establish itself, Jesus stood there and offered a radical alternative to the false shepherds that had gone before him. And it was grounded in the experience of the heart. It came from deep within, from the spirit. It was a reflection of values of justice, of compassion. It was expressed in actions of empathy, of sitting beside people, of being with people. It shaped a particular kind of attractive and strong leadership, but also shaped the community in which he lived. There are no easy answers to the problems we face at the moment. We are in that phase of paradigm shift. There is confusion, uncertainty, but there are sparks of hope. And there are examples of people who offer to us a new kind of leadership, and there are communities who are wrestling with these things. I would hope this day and in the days to come, we will take heart, that we will start to trust our inner selves, that we will live by the Spirit and generate the kind of leaders and the kind of communities that bring into our world not only a sense of compassion, not only justice, but a sense of hope, which is enlivening, galvanising, and takes us into the future in a way that gives courage for the day and promise for the future. In the name of God, Creator, Redeemer, and Sustainer. Amen.